It's Women's History Month. During this month, we recognize the contributions of women in society and in history all around the world. The Nevis Island Administration held an International Women's Day Awards ceremony on March 8th, honoring 10 women and 2 organizations. The theme for this year's International Women's Day was gender equality, today for a sustainable tomorrow. This recognized the contribution of women and girls around the world who are leading the charge in climate change adaptation, mitigation, and response to build a more sustainable future for all. Last week, we featured one of the awardees, Nikesha Henry. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with another awardee, Joy Napier, to learn about her involvement in the sustainable development of Nevis. Good morning, Joy, and welcome to Good Morning, SKN.
Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's indeed a pleasure to be here this morning with you both.
Yes, a virtual welcome. Perhaps the next time it will be face-to-face, but we'll take it any way we can get it.
So I really hope so as well.
Indeed. Congratulations on winning the NIA Award. As someone who does a lot of work in many different fields, receiving an honor like this, what did that feel like to you, and what went through your mind when you were told that you won?
Well, first of all, I really was incredibly honored. I'm not one who's big on awards and that kind of public recognition, but I was incredibly honored that I had been chosen. And I think a lot of the reason that I was selected has to do with my work with young people and environmentalism. So I'm an educator. I'm the principal of Nevis International Secondary School. And so for the past 5 years at least, our school has really had a focus on sustainability, environmentalism, and really looking towards the future of St. Kitts and Nevis.
So, Ms. Napier, in simple terms, what does sustainable development mean to you?
So when we think about sustainable development, we have to think about the future of our country. We can't just think about the projects and the things that bring money for people today. The things like the big hotels and the fancy projects that are just showing returns today. We really have to think about protecting our country for future generations. So in 30 years and in 50 years, how will these projects impact the lives of citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis? And what kind of impact will they have on our environment? How will our fish and our animals survive some of these types of projects? And so for me, sustainability is really about the future and making sure that we're not just looking at the short-term goals, but we're looking at the long-term and overall goals for our country.
As an educator, I would like a sense of what it is that you do to ensure that the younger generation, the young children in your care, actually appreciate the work concerning the environment that you hold so dear. So what can you tell us about that?
So for us, we really approach education as a holistic process. It's not just about separating math and English and science. It's about making connections with what we learn in school with the world outside and the environment. So one of the first things that we require students to do is be in tune with what is happening in the world. Every Tuesday morning, they have to present on news items. And so we really want them to realize they're connected to a bigger community or bigger ecosystem out there. And so it was actually the students who first came up with their interest and their passion in climate change. And it was when Greta Thunberg, who is the climate activist from Sweden, she was protesting just by herself outside of their parliament. And so the students came to me and we had long conversations about, why this is happening and what we can do here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We also require the students get involved in community projects. Every year they participate in the coastal cleanup, community-based cleanups. And so I think a really important part of education is empowering young people and basically passing the ball to them and letting them realize that they're the ones who are going to be in the future. It's not us, the older ones. And so that is really where we started. Nikesha was one of my students. I hear you had Nikesha on last week. And so she was one of the really active students. She started a petition to ban single-use plastics. And we actually got several of her classmates and colleagues on board. They met with the Minister of Health here in Nevis. They wrote letters, they prepared posters, and they shared this information on social media with their friends. And we also started a bottle recycling program in the school. So, raising conscious students is not just about teaching them the basics, it's also about teaching them their responsibility to society.
And I must say you would have done that well. You have done that well and other teachings, even in foreign languages. Can you expound on that for us a bit?
Okay, yes. So I was a teacher. I did work as a teacher in Central America. I worked in Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And basically, while I was there, actually, I learned that's where I really learned a lot about teaching, where I really learned Spanish well. But when I was there, I was working in primary schools in communities that were very underserved, poorer communities. And so I was working along with a team. Part of the team was from other countries, and part of the team was from the local country, Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And we went into the primary schools, and we were basically doing teacher education. So training the teachers that were there in different techniques, different tactics, and different educational practices. So that in itself was an incredible experience. It really made me realize how much we have here in St. Kitts and Nevis and how much we take for granted.
Well, speaking of taking things for granted, Joy, let's talk about the solar pad house that you grew up in. What was that like? And I imagine that has influenced your advocacy in climate change.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So basically, my dad was an engineer. He trained as an electrical engineer. And after Hurricane Hugo hit the island in 1989, he saw the impact that it had on our electrical system, and he decided to switch completely to solar. And so this was in a time where solar power, nobody knew what solar power was. It wasn't, a buzzword. It wasn't popular. And so basically, for the duration of my life, I've lived in a solar-powered house. And we've never been on the grid, we've never paid an electricity bill. And so that in itself has really taught me a lot. I think as human beings, we really think that we need a lot of things that we don't necessarily, microwave, toaster, we attain for a certain level of consumption of things, and we don't really recognize that, where these things that we're consuming are really impacting our environment. So, that experience growing up and learning about sustainability and solar really impacted my view and, my philosophy about the environment.
Hearing about it and the zero electricity bill, I'm envious. So it's something that I think that you set a model for. So that would be great to come and see if we can at a certain point in time. I don't know if we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. And throughout my childhood, my dad would invite school children, all kinds of people in to look at the solar system. He set up solar systems for a lot of people on the island. And so I've also continued, we have a movement in Nevis Off The Grid, where we're really trying to educate people about the use of alternative energy, both solar and wind energy, but also focusing on affordability, because a lot of people think solar is extremely expensive and impossible. So, we're really trying to educate about affordable steps that you can take. The fact that you don't have to go solar completely one time. Over time you can invest, and it's not just an environmental issue, it's also an economic burden. And the fact that we're so dependent on Nevlec and Skelec and unsustainable gas and diesel, and we see what's happening in the world right now. It's really time that we learn to transition to renewable energy.
So earlier in our conversation, Joy, you told us about your involvement in Nevis Off The Grid campaign. How can other persons get involved if they're interested?
Okay, so thanks a lot for asking that. We do have a Facebook page, and we really are officially just becoming a campaign, because before this we were a group of people who meet once a month and discuss sustainability and the way forward. However, do follow us on Facebook. It's Nevis Off The Grid, and we are starting to work with the Ministry of Gender Affairs and Health, because really sustainability is also a health issue. It's an environmental issue. And so I'm hoping that very soon we can partner, with the public sector as well. Some of the things that we're looking at advocating for, we really believe that it's important that our electricity companies have a plan to transition from the diesel dependence into renewable sources. And we have also advocated in the past for more concessions on solar, wind, and also on electric vehicles. And electric and hybrid vehicles are really a gray area at the moment in the legislation in St. Kitts and Nevis. We did have an incident with one of our members who had an electric bicycle that was confiscated by the police because it was quote unquote electric. And so this type of legislation, these are the things that we're pushing so that Nevis and St. Kitts really have progressive legislation and policies when it comes to environmentalism.
In our final moments, Joy, what can you tell us about the Girls Can social media campaign?
Okay, so the Girls Can social media campaign is another campaign that I've been a part of and that I actually started, and it also started from within my school. And it really examines gender roles and what girls can and can't do it. And it actually started from a very simple incident that occurred in our classroom. We were moving some desks, and the boys said, okay, this is our job. And one of the girls said, no, girls can move the desks too. And so from that very simple interaction, we began the discussion of what girls can do. And so the Girls Can campaign was born. Every year we try to, around International Women's Month, which is in March, we try to raise awareness of, girls in non-traditional fields, such as women who work as engineers, electricians, and girls in fields that are not necessarily known to be women-oriented fields, but that are more male-dominated. And so it really began as a discussion in our school, and it evolved into a social media campaign, and then, a whole movement of what girls can do.
Good stuff.
Well, there is, I'm really pushing the envelope here and asking you this question, but there's another campaign. We have roughly 30 seconds, but I want to get to it. The Dirty Up Your Finger campaign. Am I saying it right?
Yes, all right. Dirty Up Your Finger. So this is a voter education and advocacy campaign. And this came about because around election time, and all the time, people are just like, I don't want to vote. It doesn't make sense. The politicians are just doing nonsense. And so Jana, Elizabeth, and myself, we co-founded this campaign, Dirty Up Your Finger. And it's really to encourage people to vote, to educate people on the importance of voting. But it was also a call on our politicians to refrain from corruption in voting. So we actually spoke to several of the political leaders. We asked them to pledge that they won't give bribes, take bribes for votes. And so this is a campaign that we started, and we are going to be continuing. And we think it's something that's very important as well.